Okay. And then maybe I will view just whoever's the speaker right now. Okay. Amazing. Okay. I'm just going to. Okay. So, hi, everyone. My name is Michael Dang, and I am the film liaison of the UBC Film Society for the year 2020 and 2021. I'd like to welcome everyone to our sixth event of the Norm Select series, which is also the first event of 2021. Are you excited, Pavan? You're the inaugural one for this year.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, and our guest is the director and writer, Pavan Moondi. Pavan Moondi is a writer originally from Toronto and currently based in LA, Los Angeles. He has written and directed three critically acclaimed feature films, Every Day is Like Sunday, Diamond Tongues, Sundowners, the latter of which co-stars the comedian Tim Heidecker and was financed by Telefilm and shot primarily in Santa Marta, Colombia. The film was named one of Globe and Mail's top 10 Canadian films of 2017. Pavin's previous film, Diamond Tongues, premiered at Slamdance to critical acclaim, while garnering a Canadian Screen Award nomination for its first time star Leah Fay Goldstein of the band July Talk. Both films are streaming on Amazon Prime in the US and CBC Gem in Canada. So if anybody watching is in Canada right now, you can watch all of Pavin's films for free on CBC Gem, and it's super exciting. Pavin's also worked in television. In 2016, he directed all 8 episodes of the CBC single camera sitcom Four in the Morning, and worked in the writers' room for the Emmy Award nominated fifth season of Schitt's Creek, starring Catherine O'Hara and Eugene Levy, and he's currently developing a series with comedian Pete Holmes. So, hello, Pavin. Welcome to the Norm Selects.
Man.
Yeah. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that even though we are online, that UBC, we gather on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam peoples. And in Vancouver, we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. So, yes, just to get, the land claim. So yes, let's start the interview with Pavin. Hello again. I know I've introduced you like probably 3 times and I did a whole bio.
Hmm.
But yes, so before we get into your films more in kind of detail, let's kind of start. Tell us about how you sort of picked up a film camera and decided you wanted to become a director.
Um, so I had always had kind of an interest in writing for television when I was like in high school, and I like obsessively watched a lot of television growing up, and so that was something I was always interested in. But I grew up about an hour and a half outside of Toronto, and I didn't really see a path to doing that, especially in Canada. Um, and so I found myself in school for business, for economics actually. And so I was studying economics, and uh, I remember this very specific moment where I was in this like 300 person lecture hall, and I looked around and I realized that I was the dumbest person in the room. Like I had no clue what they were talking about. It was like a really advanced microeconomics course. And so I started to panic a little bit. But at the same time, I had discovered these films that were being made I think this would have been like 2007, maybe. Uh, there were these really low budget films being made by like Andrew Bujalski and really early Joe Swanberg films that were made for like less than $1,000. And I was finding them on DVD at like the independent video store where I was going to school. And that kind of blew my mind, like this idea that somebody could make a film for $600 and it would be distributed in Canada on a DVD and it could be accessible to people. And so that kind of got the wheels turning a little bit. So I ended up just using like a handy cam and shooting a bunch of like no budget short films just to give myself footage that I could edit with. And so I taught myself how to edit by shooting these like terrible shorts. And then when I graduated, it was like the height of the economic recession. And so my degree was useless anyway. Like there was no path forward in that field. And so I got an internship at a production company in Toronto. So I moved to Toronto then and worked at this production company doing like really mindless, like I think I was just digitizing beta tapes the whole time, like all day. And so I did that for like 4 months. And about a year later, I got that company to finance Every Day is Like Sunday. And so that was like a really big turning point, because once that film got made, it was just a matter of like spinning whatever minor success that was into the next thing.
So, yeah, your feature, as you aforementioned, is called Every Day is Like Sunday, which is a film that was released in 2013, and you wrote and directed it. Michael Sloan is also credited as a writer on the film, and the film was initially a short film with a different cast, playing Mark and Jason. And did you find it challenging to take your script for the short and turn it into something that is longer and more of a feature length?
Um, Sort of. So what happened was the short was really a pilot, and so it was like a 22-minute pilot that we shot for like maybe $1,000 over 3 days or something, and it was just kind of a thing for me to figure out the technical aspects of filmmaking, because I was like really getting my feet wet at that point. And so I had that in terms of the script. The film was actually written as a series, as a web series, and the company that I worked for was a web series production company. So when we shot the film, we were all under the impression it was a web series. Like it was 10 episodes that were 10 minutes long. And as we were shooting, I started to get it into my head that with like a few strategic edits here and there, we could make it flow as a feature. And so we did that. Our plan was going to be that we would have a web series version that's like a bit longer with like some extra stuff in it. And then we'd have a feature film version. And so we edited the feature film version first. And that came out in Toronto, and it was on Netflix for a while, and it did well enough that there was no need to even make the web series version. So the web series version just got scrapped.
Oh, okay. So it was a pilot first for a web series. Oh yeah, that's very interesting. Um, and it's kind of interesting because when you were talking about what films made you, want to become a filmmaker, these filmmakers, Andrew Brzezinski, Joe Swanberg, and I can see Cassavetes' poster for Husbands in the background right now. It's these very, I noticed a lot of those influences in there. You really like, a lot of like kind of witty banter and talking. You're really into talking. Sometimes your films, and definitely the films of Swanberg and Brzezinski, have been called mumblecore cinema. Is this a term that you like or you find is useful in kind of contextualizing your work?
I think it's definitely useful as a contextual marker, at least for Every Day is Like Sunday, because that film, I think like thematically, it is very much in that like slacker realm. I think maybe less so with Diamond Tongues or Sundowners, but I think it feels kind of like a dated term or like a dead term. Even when we made Every Day is Like Sunday, it felt like that moment had already kind of passed. And I think that like those early mumblecore films that I had seen were really, really loose and unstructured. Like they were almost completely unscripted and like entirely improvised and really naturalistic, but really slow moving. And I think those guys and a lot of those people who started out in those like early 2000s have gradually shifted to a more scripted format where there is like still some loose improvisation, but they're like Andrew Brzezinski's films have full scripts. And I think Every Day is Like Sunday is closer to those films that they were making like 5 years after their initial mumblecore films, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And that actually kind of brings me to another question of yours. And you can kind of say it's different from each film that you've made. But on your sets, do you leave like a lot of room for your actors to sort of improvise, or do you prefer to kind of keep a tighter script?
So there is a full script. It's everything's written, and then it does depend on uh, the scene and what we need out of the scene, and sometimes whether the scene is working or not. Uh, and when we made Every Day is Like Sunday, like we weren't necessarily sure we were going to shoot that way or not. And there's a scene in that movie that like we really took the reins off and just let it go completely wild. And it's this scene where the main character like comes home after he spends this night with this girl and he's in love with her, and he comes into his roommate and his roommate's girlfriend's bed, and he's
Yes,
like,
I remember that scene. Yeah, quite clearly.
that scene was like a big breakthrough because we just like fully improvised it. We like put the content first, even over any technical aspect of it. Like it wasn't even covered properly. There's like crazy jump cuts in it. The lighting is terrible. Uh, but I think it's probably the best scene in the movie, despite all those technical elements. And so I always kind of viewed it since then as like a tool where like we can see what the improvised version of the scene looks like to see if it works better depending on the function than what's scripted. But if it doesn't, we still have the scripted scene to fall back on. And so that was kind of the methodology with Diamond Tongues, where it was like I had a much better sense of what we were doing, and with Sundowners especially. Like there's definitely a lot of the Tim Heidecker stuff in Sundowners is like pretty heavily improvised. Um, because I know that like Tim is such a great improviser, like it would be a real shame to bring him into this film and then force him to be confined to this script. But then there are other scenes that are like pretty tightly scripted in that film. So it depends. It depends what you need out of the scene. Like if a scene exists to drive the story forward, it doesn't really benefit you to make it really loose and improvised because you're not necessarily going for like a big laugh or like an unexpected moment in every scene.
Yes, so it is kind of more like whatever the scene calls for. If it's kind of more, kind of getting into, a character, then it could be more kind of improvised versus driving the plot forward or something like that.
Yeah, for
You would
sure.
uh-huh. So speaking of Diamond Tongues, for a film like Diamond Tongues, what really, struck me was that we spend so much time with the main character of Edith, and she's this struggling actress in Toronto, and I think Leah Fay Goldstein is such like a charismatic and compelling person to watch, and I found her such a joy to watch, even if she was doing awful things to other people and to her friends, and she was a very just dynamic and compelling kind of screen character. And Leah Goldstein is of the band July Talk, and as I said, some people in the audience might know her from July Talk. This was also her first time acting as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
Okay, so how did you meet Leah? Was the character and script written for her in mind, or was it had you already written the script and you just kind of, found her?
The script was written, and we had been trying to cast the part for quite a while. Like it was definitely a few months that we were looking for someone, and we were putting out casting calls, and like nothing was really popping. Um, and to your point, like we knew early on that we needed someone who would be really engaging and who would have like an immediate likability to them, because that character is doing such horrible things. You need a way to conflict the audience, because if that character isn't engaging or isn't charming, you're just going to turn off the audience and they're not going to want to watch the rest of the movie. And so and that was kind of the hard thing to find. And so at the time, I don't think I was familiar with July Talk. This was like years ago. And I went to a party uh, during the Toronto Film Festival, and July Talk was the like musical performance, and we were trying to cast this film, and we were thinking about it the whole time, and we were like looking around at the party, trying to see like is anybody here who we could cast in this role, because I think we were going to start shooting in like a month, like it was pretty soon. Or we were going to shoot it. We shot a demo first, actually. So we knew we were going to shoot a demo. And then we saw Leah on stage, and she was giving like a really out of control live performance. Like she had a shoe on her head. She was like, she collapsed on the ground, and it was like really immediately engaging. And so I approached her after she got off stage, and I ended up getting introduced to Peter, who is also in July Talk, and he's also a cinematographer. So he shot the movie. We ended up just bringing them both in, and so he shot the movie and she acted in it. So it was a pretty cool combination.
Yeah, oh, that's amazing. And also, I kept saying Leah for the longest time, but now I'm saying Leia because, it's,
Yeah.
I caught on the pronunciation there. Um, as a first time actor, did you feel that like Leia was a natural as this character, that she could really like embed it and was just like on film, she could just kind of naturally just kind
Yeah,
of
I think so. I think she had some sort of performing background, like not necessarily acting, but she was like obviously comfortable in front of people and comfortable expressing herself, and I think that was useful. But yeah, I mean, like her performance in that movie carries the movie. She's in every single scene. Like it's like that's a really hard role to pull off, and it was like it was mind blowing. Especially like we shot that film in I think like 8 or 9 days. Like it was an insanely fast shoot for like a 100-minute film. So she was kind of thrown to the wolves, but yeah, I think if she didn't have like the innate ability to do it, we just wouldn't have gotten the film even done at that point.
I was wondering, because we kind of talked about how Edith is this sort of character who is, over the course of the film, she kind of does these things that are kind of very unsympathetic, and a lot of she sabotages herself ultimately, but kind of her friends around her. And I wanted to know, how did you kind of approach the writing of this character? Did you want it to be a character that the audience was sort of conflicted about? And would you say that even to the degree that she is unsympathetic, do you identify or with her in some ways?
I think so. I think the idea was um, with Every Day is Like Sunday. I knew broad strokes that was a film about people who didn't know what they wanted to do with their lives, and so when I had started thinking about Diamond Tongues before, like I had fully formed what it would be, the general idea was that it should be about someone who knows exactly what they want to do with their life, but they don't know how to do it. And I thought that was like a relatable thing to tap into. And so it just kept kind of building on top of that. And uh, there's definitely, I mean, I've that film of all of them, that's the one that like people come up to you after a screening and like really relate to that character, because I think uh, when you're in such a competitive industry, like those feelings are completely natural and people don't really talk about them. And so I thought it would be good to shine a light on that in a bit of a heightened, and like some of it is obviously like tongue in cheek, like her pulling the fire alarm and like how outrageous it gets. But I think at its core, I think it is relatable for people who have been in like any type of artistic field where like there's no, it's not a meritocracy. You can't just work harder than everybody and mean that it doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And so it causes all these like feelings of stewing and of bad behavior in some cases.
Yeah, for sure. And that was one thing that I just wanted to say to you, that I felt really rung true about the film when I was watching it. It was because, when you're in kind of this a sort of competitive arts industry, and I don't know why I'm saying competitive like it's its own thing. Every arts industry is kind of competitive in its own way. it's kind of like you have friends that you meet in the industry and you are similar because you have the same sort of passion and the same sort of dreams, but in the same way they're your friend, but you're also their competitor in a sort of way. And that's one of the reasons why it, really kind of resonated with me was, and that's why I kind of ultimately felt sympathy for Edith, because I kind of understood that. Um, and it's also the title of the film Diamond Tugs is quite meta because it is also the title of the film within a film, which is the film that gets premiered at the gallery. And one of the funniest some of the funniest parts of the film were these sort of tongue-in-cheek in story production titles. I loved Blood Sausage, Dr. Hussey, Dog Husband. So what did you want to satirize with these in-story film titles and productions? And how did you come up with this concept for the film within a film? Also being the
Um,
title of the real film.
sure. The film within a film was like pretty heavily improvised on the day, and we just knew we had to shoot something that was going to be bad. And so I think we shot that in an hour with, we got Matt Johnson to like have a little cameo, and we just gave him a gun and just told him to improvise. So it was very loose. And then we just edited it to be as bad as possible, and as cheesy as possible. And I think when I was editing it, we got the idea to call it Diamond Tongues, because at the time when the movie was called Diamond Tongues, there was going to be no reference to the title at all. But that seemed like a way to do it where it would feel like it's a pretty pivotal point in the movie when that does come up. And so we thought that that was kind of fitting. And then your other question, about satirizing. I think it's definitely tongue in cheek, but the fact is, like, when you're working like in the industry and you have to be dialed into all of this stuff, a lot of the stuff you see is really bad, and like you have to kind of bite your tongue, and like you might have to go to a screening of a movie that you think is terrible, and you see all of your friends are there, and you're walking out of the theater after, and everyone's just kind of looking at each other, but nobody's saying anything. And then when you're like 200 feet away from the venue, then everyone can talk about how bad it is. And that felt like we wanted to kind of plant that throughout, like where everything is bad, and then have it culminate in this moment where Edith's short premieres and everyone's telling her it's amazing and how good it is, even though she can even recognize how bad it is. So that was that, I guess.
So speaking of kind of local film industries, you're from Toronto, or an island outside of, or like not an island. Why did I Animal
The
is
suburbs, basically.
Oh yeah, the suburbs of, yeah, it was an Animal Crossing Freudian slip that I said island. But so you're from the suburbs outside of Toronto, but you're now based in LA, and I would assume that you're in LA right now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So both of these cities have these kind of pretty localized film industries. LA is, of course, very famous for it. Why did you move to LA, and what is the main difference that you would say, but in your own experience, between the way the film industry is in LA compared to Toronto?
Um, it's different, but it's also, I'm also at a different stage of my like life, so it's my interaction with it is different. Like when I was coming up in Toronto, like I was in my 20s trying to scrape by and make like films for $15,000 or $30,000 or whatever. And there was definitely a good community of people who were doing the same thing. Like everyone was kind of making these films on shoestring budgets for like $10,000 or less. I feel like there's less of that going on now. I could be wrong just because I'm more disconnected from it, but I feel like there's less because at the time there was no like telefilm talent to watch, or like there weren't these programs for first time filmmakers to make features at micro budget levels. And so that was what we had to do to make our films, was like you had to make a film for $10,000 because it was the only way you could really do it. Um, but it definitely created uh, like there's definitely an element of competitiveness, but also there was like an element of collaboration and excitement and of being part of like something bigger where everybody's coming up together at the same time. Which I feel like this was maybe like 8 or 9 or 10 years ago. Um, LA is different because I feel like I'm less uh, connected to the independent film scene, and I also don't know if people are scraping by and making those films at those budget levels as much anymore. I think that the conversation about like paid labor has changed. Like being able to get away with making a film for $15,000 and like paying everyone like barely anything. Probably for like, that's probably a good thing. But so I feel like there's less of that happening. But I moved here basically because I wanted to get more into television. I wanted to work more in television. And in Canada, there's just like every year, there's just less and less shows made. And so there's less and less opportunities, and it feels like there's a really low ceiling. And so I felt like I had to do it. I felt like if I didn't come here, I would probably regret it later, like 10 years from now, if I didn't come give it a crack. But it's not that different.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you talk about how you moved to LA because, you wanted to get more into television and kind of like you said a bit earlier, you kind of got into kind of screenwriting from like a kind of a television, point of view. And for people out there, and kind of like we mentioned in the biography, you've worked on the fifth season of Schitt's Creek. I'm just trying to, oh, it's in the bottom of the agenda over here. You worked on the fifth season of Schitt's Creek, where you were the story editor for 14 episodes of the show, and you also directed. You also directed Four in the Morning, which was the CBC show in 2016. But going back to Schitt's Creek, when you were in the writers' room, what would you say, apart from kind of this sort of being in a group kind of team setting, and I would assume that screenwriting usually is kind of a more kind of isolated, maybe one or two other people thing. What would you say are the predominant main differences between writing for film and writing for television?
Um, I think they're pretty different, or I think they're different, but I've pulled a lot of what I learned in that room into like stuff I'll write on my own now. So I think the process has maybe become more similar. Um, I think in a TV writer's room, it's a lot more efficient and it's a lot more structured and structure intensive. And so uh, you learn a lot about breaking things down like point by point. And it's like Schitt's Creek especially is a very structured show. Like it's every episode has almost the same number of story beats in it, or the same number of stories. It's like it's a very structured show, and so that was a good show to learn on because you learn so much about structure and having it beaten into your head. And now when I write, if I'm writing a film, I'll really deliberately outline it in a way that I didn't do before, and it's made me like way more productive and way more efficient with using my time. But then in a room, also you learn like about the dynamics of a room. Like if you have a great idea, but you pitch it at the wrong time, the idea will fall flat. So you have to learn how to like know when the right time is to drop that idea, and reading the temperature of the room and knowing like, okay, I'm going to wait for this other idea to run its course and then I'll drop this idea. So there's a whole other like mental game that you kind of have to play, because you want to put your best foot forward and you want your ideas to get traction. But so much of whether they get traction or not has to do with more than just what the idea is. You know what I mean? Like it's about how you pitch it or when you pitch it, or like yeah, like if you pitch something where everyone's racking their brain trying to figure out something else, that's probably not going to succeed. Like that's a bad time to pitch it. And so things like that are useful to learn for sure.
Yeah. So, speaking of kind of television, there is this daydream sequence where Edith imagines herself as a guest on George Stroumboulopoulos' show. And in that scene, you got George to play himself, and you guys used the like actual set of his television show. And I wanted to know, how did you make this scene happen? Where did the idea come from, and how did you kind of get it to fruition?
Um, I had so I think the scene itself wasn't in the original script. And then I think like a week before we started shooting, I'm pretty sure, I had the idea for the scene that there would be a scene where Edith is on giving some sort of interview, and then it would cut to her masturbating, reciting the interview. And so we had that idea for the scene, and then it was a matter of figuring out like what show can we get feasibly like in time to do that. And I think at one point I feel like I had originally conceived it to be Q, with it would have been Gian Gomeshi at the time, so good thing we didn't do that.
Yeah, eek, 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 eek.
Yeah, that would have been bad. But our producer, Sarah, she had like a really tight connection with the producer of Strombo's show. And so she basically just called in a favor, and we just went to the set and they tacked it on to the end of an episode. So they shot an episode of his show, they kept the audience there, and then they brought Leah out in character, and they just filmed it on their cameras and gave us the file, and then we cut it in.
Yeah, oh, that worked out really well. I feel. Oh, what's going on with the muting right now? Oh, okay. Sorry, there's just been some technical issues to anybody who's watching the stream right now, but we're just gonna get through. Okay, so let's talk about Sundowners for a bit because your first two films are set in Toronto. They are shot on location in Toronto, where you're from. And Sundowners, for the first 25 minutes or so, is in Toronto, but the film mostly takes place in Mexico, and the bulk of the film was shot in Colombia. And I reckon kind of the production process would be a lot more different for kind of planning, like location scouting in Colombia and all those logistical things. So, what were some of the big production challenges that were different for this film than your other film? And did you mostly do pre-prod from afar, or did you stay in Colombia for a while and try to work things out kind of on the ground?
Um, so we shot first in Colombia. So we did do pre-production in Colombia. I'm just trying to remember how it all laid out. I think we went. I think I might have gone twice. I'm trying to remember if I went twice or not. I think I went and looked at resorts and stuff, and we had to pick the right resort because the 90% of what we shot in Colombia was shot at the resort. And so I went with one of the producers, and we just like checked out a bunch of resorts and we picked one. And so I can't remember if I came back to Canada and then we went back again, or if I just stayed there. But then the whole crew met us there. And so basically we were all living on this like all-inclusive resort and shooting the film. And so it was like a great way to shoot because you would just like wake up. They gave us like the best rooms. I was in like the presidential suite on like the 100th floor. Like it was an insane resort.
Ooh, fancy.
It was very fancy. It was like the fanciest hotel room I've ever been in. I'm sure I never will be again. But it was like great to just wake up, grab the cameras, walk down to the beach and start shooting because so much of it was shot at the resort. And so in a way, once we were at the resort, I feel like logistically it was a lot more flexible because we were just like going to locations within this one location. It was tricky though. Like we had a half Colombian crew. So half our crew we brought from Canada. The other half were local to Colombia. and they were all great, but there was like definitely a language barrier. Like there were like some key crew who didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak Spanish. And so we had to use like Google Translate to communicate with each other on set. Like it was, it overall it went well, uh, but it was an undertaking. Like that was definitely the hardest one, and it was at the time the biggest one. Like when we shot Diamond Tongues, we had like a maybe 10 people for our entire crew, and we just drove around in a van, and we had like a case of beers, and we'd just be like shooting, and it was much more relaxed and just felt like making a film with your friends. Whereas Sundowners felt like there was a lot more pressure and a lot more on the line, because we also, like, we couldn't just add more shoot days in Colombia if we needed pickups. Like you had to get absolutely everything that you needed. And it was like so hot. It was like 40 degrees in the sun. Like, so it was physically draining. It was definitely the toughest for sure. Um, but overall, yeah, logistically, we shot all the Colombia stuff, and then we came back to Canada, and we had like a week of pre-production for the Canada shoot, and then we shot for like I think 4 or 5 days in Toronto, and that was we had like I think we had 4 or 5 days to shoot like 20 minutes of material, whereas in Colombia I think we had like 9 days to shoot like an hour and 10 minutes of material. So the pace in Toronto was much more slow and relaxed, and it was a good way to end the shoot just because Colombia was so intense.
Well, okay, so you shot. Oh, whoops, sorry. Is it coming across? Oh, okay. It sounds good now. Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Pavan, and everybody watching for like bearing with me on some of these technical issues. I don't know what's.
It all sounds good to me.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, great. Maybe it's just my headphones. Okay. So maybe I shouldn't have revealed that to keep the, the professional sort of curtain on this, but we're doing this DIY. This is, So, can you tell us a little bit about how you were inspired to write a film about, these two wedding photographers, one of which who is kind of impostering a wedding photographer? Was that something that you had prior experience with and were trying to, sort of put that on script?
Yeah. So after when I was interning at that production company after university, I did a stint shooting weddings. So I probably shot like maybe 30 weddings in a year, and I really hated it. And so it was driving me nuts, and I felt like I had learned all that I had to learn in shooting and editing weddings. And so the last wedding that I shot was a destination wedding in Mexico. And I did bring my friend as the photographer, who was not a photographer. So the setup of the film basically was what actually happened in real life. And there are definitely parts of what happened in the film that are that happened in real life. Like we did shoot the wedding with no sound, and so it was like a big disaster. And so that's definitely the film in terms of what happens in the movie. That's like the closest to just like straight autobiographical. Like a lot of those things happened in real life. Like for a while, it was like the story I would tell at parties about like this crazy wedding. And so I knew all the beats. And I think the more I told that story, the more I realized that I was essentially like verbally writing the script without even realizing it.
But I would assume that there wasn't some sort of like moment where you were like, okay, let's stop. We have to redo the wedding again for the video. That was more sort of your what you wish you could have done at that moment, even if it wasn't in sound.
Yes, yeah, that didn't happen in the movie. They figure out that the father of the bride is filming the wedding on his camera, and so they pull the audio from his feed and sync it up. And that was what happened in real life, was that we got the audio from somebody else's camera, and I had to sync it up by eye. It took forever. So that part's true, but no, there was no redo in real life. That was a license.
So you said once in an interview with the Globe and Mail that financiers kind of turned down financing Sundowners because they wanted quote unquote bigger set pieces. But that was deliberately kind of the movie that you didn't want to make. Could you maybe elaborate on that statement a bit more about why you didn't want to use these sort of bigger set pieces, but perhaps these sort of like littler kind of comedy of error moments?
I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. I feel like it was tricky. The process to get that film made was a long process because that was the first film that I wrote after Every Day is Like Sunday. And so the plan was to make Sundowners second. And so I spent like maybe a year, maybe a couple years trying to get it going. And it was too big in scope. Like the fact that the movie needed to be shot outside of Canada, that it needed to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's what motivated me to write Diamond Tongues after, but we ended up shooting Diamond Tongues first because it was so much smaller. But I think with Sundowners, like maybe what I was talking about was how that movie on paper, when you describe it to someone, it sounds like The Hangover or something, or with Wedding Crashers. And I think that can be a good thing because when you pitch it, people get excited because it's like, oh, this could be like a huge, broad comedy. But then that's not actually what the film is. The film is like engaging with people's expectations of The Hangover or Wedding Crashers, and then deliberately like baits and switches that. Like we set up a lot of big set pieces and then we don't pay those off on purpose. And so I feel like that's what I was talking about is in a way, it's like a film that's designed to disappoint people, but it's like it knows what it's doing. But it's tricky because I think people who get that, and especially who've seen Diamond Tongues, I think understand what the movie's doing. But then there are definitely people who have like discovered the movie thinking they're going to watch Wedding Crashers and then are like horribly upset that that's not like the movie's way more grounded and depressing than Wedding Crashers is.
Well, that's almost kind of like the protagonist's arc in some sort of ways, is that they kind of see this sort of vision for what this destination wedding could potentially bring them, and they get cuckolded kind of the whole way, and then all the times they try to have fun, it just kind of ends up sabotaging it. So it's almost sort of like you said, I thought that was really funny. Kind of like the film is set up to disappoint people, but that's almost like the character's arc in some sort of ways. Would you say that that's true?
I think that is true, and there's definitely like one of the things I remember thinking about was how there are a lot of broad characters around them as when they get to Mexico. Like there's a wacky dad, there's like a hypersexualized sister, and those characters are characters from other movies, and the movie keeps wanting to turn into the Wedding Crashers movie or The Hangover, but then reality keeps interrupting and getting in the way. And so I think we're deliberately planting those seeds so that the audience thinks like, okay, this sister is all over Justin's character. Like, of course, in the third act, he's going to end up having sex with her and he's going to get in trouble from the family or whatever. But then we totally drop that thread and it doesn't go anywhere. So I think for me, that was a movie that was really all about trying to subvert expectations, I think, and engage with like what people think they're going to get when they hear about a movie about two guys going to party in Mexico.
Would you say that kind of a thread between your films is this sort of I guess the sort of theme of disappointment on the point of view of its characters? They keep having these sort of high expectations, but it just keeps getting sort of grounded in this sort of reality. Because I think about what you're saying a lot and how that kind of relates to sort of Diamond Tongues, and even Every Day is Like Sunday in a way, where it's like these characters sort of thought they would be at a place, but they don't exactly know how to sort of work to get there.
Yeah, I think For sure, like that. That's definitely deliberate. Like I think I remember the things that I was focusing on in writing all of those films was small victories and in giving the characters what they need and not what they want. And so we really set up what they want in each film. Mark wants to get the girl, Edith wants to become a famous actress, and the guys want to have like the vacation out of the hangover. Uh, but what they end up getting is like in a way more valuable. Like I think the films are all like, despite being depressing to a certain degree, I think they all have like a relatively helpful ending. Uh, so I think ultimately they're not depressing, but I think throughout it's just it is like uncomfortably real at some time, hopefully.
Yeah, I felt that a lot. So over your three films, and I'm just kind of trying to find similarities, but I'm like, finding similarities between your three films. I sense kind of these two types of actors that you like to hire as your stars. They're either, well, not either. There's, of course, this is kind of a broad generalization, but you work a lot with stand-up comedians like Nick Flanagan, Phil Hanley, David Deneen Porter, and indie musicians like Leah Fay Goldstein, Luke Leland, Nicholas Thornburg. Would you say that working with stand-ups and indie musicians, is this a reflection of kind of just the circles that you run in and the people that you intimately know? Or why do you think you end up working with a lot of these sort of types of people?
I think it's a bit of that. Like, it's definitely, I feel like most of my friends are either musicians or comedians. But I think initially it was a matter of like logistics, because when when you're making a film in like an Everyday's Like Sunday's case for $16,000, you have to be a non-union film, so you can't use union actors. And the pool of non-union actors, like it's really kind of dire. Like you would have to really dig through to find somebody worthwhile. And so I think the philosophy on Everyday's Like Sunday was like, okay, we, instead of casting non-union actors, why don't we try to work with musicians and comedians who aren't in the union anyway? And like, I know their personalities, I know who they are. They kind of have something they can relate to with these characters, but they can also bring themselves to the character, and we can shape the character around them. And so in a way, it's sort of foolproof, because you're asking them to kind of be themselves, but think of themselves put in this situation, rather than like a very clear cut, like you have to act as this character, which can lead to like a lot of bad acting. And also like with stand-up comedians, especially, like they're just like way more adept at improvising. And in Everyday's Like Sunday and in Diamond Tongues and in Sundowners, like I definitely wanted to be able to whip that tool out. And you can't necessarily do that with a union actor if they don't have any experience doing it. So yeah, like I think it's both. I've like on Four in the Morning, I worked with actors. I don't think there was any stand-up comedians. I think Nick Flanagan is in there briefly, and there's no musicians in it. So that's a different experience for sure. It's a little more structured, but I'm definitely not opposed to like working with an actor or anything like that.
So I didn't think you were. It was just, something that I was noticing. So let's move on to kind of film and color because yeah, tell us about the origin of this project, and you can kind of give like a sort of a pitch or a log line to maybe anyone that's watching. Why did you feel the need to create this database and this tool?
Sure. So about a year and a half ago, there had been like a startling like lack of conversation about like diversity in especially the Canadian film industry. Like it was kind of it was taking a back seat. And so I had like called out a few things on social media about how like they, at the time, Telefilm hadn't even defined what diversity meant for like 4 years or something. And so that was like personally frustrating. And so when I did that, I was like taken aback by how much people like agreed with it, and I'd noticed the same thing, but didn't really want to vocalize it. And it was clear that this was like an issue. And so like I do have some like latent web skills that I had at my disposal, and it just felt like a useful tool that I was capable of making. So I made it like part-time over the course of 6 months. And what it is it's basically, I call it a tool just because I built it to be autonomous, so I don't have to like maintain it, or like it's not an organization or anything. It's just like it's a platform where you can go look up like any BIPOC creatives, and people can sign up and put like their reels on there, put their CV on there, fill out all this like personal data, so that hopefully if someone is like hiring a writer, they can go through all these different profiles and see like, oh, this person's favorite show is this. Like, this is like an obscure show that's a good reference for this thing I'm working on. Like, maybe I'll hire this person. So that was the genesis for it, and that didn't exist at the time. There's definitely been like in the last year a huge push, which is great. And yeah, it's good. It seems like a lot of people have signed up and are using it.
So just kind of a quick logistical question for kind of anyone who's watching. Could you kind of elaborate on how somebody who maybe identifies as Black, Indigenous, or as a person of color, how they could, sign up and be included on the site? Or I believe there's a separate section for like white allies too, right? And there's a separate registration for that.
Yeah, so if you are like a BIPOC creative, you can sign up on the site. It's just as easy as like filling out a form, and then you can create your profile. It is like pretty instantaneous, so it'll be up within like minutes of you signing up, and you just check off like whatever you're interested in, what your experience level is, like where you're based. And then you're part of this database where if you are like a white creative looking to hire someone, or like looking to hire a cinematographer or whatever, an editor, you can go through this like pretty detailed search tool where you can like break it down by experience level. You can search like by specific TV shows. Like if you're looking for a writing collaborator who loves a certain show you love, you can type in that show and see all the people who also like that show, for example. So it's it's pretty straightforward. Like it's you don't have to pay anything. You don't have to. It's nothing like that. You just sign up. Pretty simple form.
Yeah, and would you say that do you intend the database to focus on people who are Canadians and working in the Canadian film industry, or can anyone who, lives and works around the world be registered for the site?
Register. So it's open to everyone right now, but it was only Canadian for like the first good chunk of time. So it is like heavily Canadian skewed. But it exists. It's kind of done like as a project. I feel like all the technical stuff is finished, and so I think it'll just organically grow over time, and hopefully people keep using it.
I wanted to add, oh, sorry. Oh no, you could hear me fine, right? I just heard like it's this weird echo for a second, but it's something going on my side. Sorry to everyone. Back in September, and I wanted to know kind of your because you created Film and Color and you're so invested in this sort of diversity in the film and TV industry. I wanted to know your thoughts on the Academy's new diversity requirements for Best Picture. Basically, for those out there, a film now must meet 2 out of 4 requirements, standards to be deemed eligible, both off-screen and on-screen inclusivity. So it's some sort of minority either off screen or on screen. And I wanted to know, Pavan, your thoughts on these new rules. Do you believe that they will be enough to make more inclusive spaces within the film industry, or are they simply kind of the bare minimum of the institutional change that, needs to happen?
Yeah, it's tricky. I can't remember what the requirements specifically are, but I remember reading them and thinking that most films would probably qualify. I'm pretty sure. Um, so I don't think they're too stringent or strict or anything like that. Uh, I think it's good. I also don't know that like I think especially in the last year, you have a lot of people who are excited about wanting to do something to show their support. But I think there needs to be more uh, of these kinds of initiatives taking place earlier in the pipeline, like when a film is financed or uh, being made versus like the awards cycle is like literally the last thing a film would go through. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how huge of an impact it will have on the films that are being made. It's better than doing nothing, but I think that the pressure I think needs to be applied uh, at the early stages in development and developing projects and optioning projects, and even like who producers are willing to take a pitch from. Are they willing to take a pitch from someone who doesn't have an agent? Are they like, I think things like that, which hopefully uh, Film and Color will help. Like, it will help people uh, find filmmakers who maybe are like literally underrepresented, like they don't have a manager or an agent, but a producer who is like hungry and willing to do the work can go through and look at all these profiles and find people to collaborate with. I think initiatives on that front end will ultimately be more fruitful.
Would you
Would
be
you be
comfortable if we talked about the telefilm situation a bit from a couple months ago? Yeah.
I've got to like really tiptoe around it.
Okay. So
Uh,
just for some people who are watching who might have not known what's happened, Pavin here, he kind of shared his experiences with Dan Leon, who is the feature film executive for the Ontario area for Telefilm Canada, and kind of you shared your experiences about this sort of ambiguity of his sort of claims to diversity, and his taste is kind of all over the place. And your tweets ultimately led to a series of sexual harassment allegations against him. And Telefilm, I think, launched an investigation against him that, recently kind of wrapped and didn't really do anything. And you said in your tweets, and I thought it was very important that you did share your experiences. You said in your tweets that sharing the story was "quote unquote" necessary, even if you are blacklisted in Canada, at least. So was considering that Telefilm had helped to, um, finance Diamond Tongues and Sundowners, were these stories like scary for you to come out with?
um, yes and no. I think that another thing that I put in there is that I did that after like I had been waiting for an answer on a project that I had submitted, and uh, I think what I said, I think, isn't surprising to anyone who had like worked in the industry. It was like stuff that everybody talks about, but that is really difficult to say because you have to like kiss the ring, or you had to kiss the ring, and you don't want to say anything that could get you in trouble because it could totally like impact your ability to get a film financed if you piss off like the one person who has like an incredible amount of power over that. And so I think I felt a little liberated by like that project being rejected, because I was like, well, who gives a shit at this point? Like, I can say something that I know a lot of people agree with, and maybe they aren't comfortable saying it for the same reason I wasn't comfortable saying it. Um, so that was definitely my intention, was like to shine a light on like I had been biting my tongue for like a year at that point about that. I'd also like spoken to him directly about this issue in person like a year prior, and like nothing happened in terms of like defining what diversity is. And sure enough, like within a couple months of that tweet thread, like they defined diversity, and there's been like a huge groundswell of all of these people doing like incredible work, taking them to task, and he's no longer there anymore. So I think it's like
I didn't know that, so that's good. Yeah.
he has retired. Uh,
Okay, so yeah.
no coincidence at all. But yeah, so I think that there's been a lot of positive change, and a lot of people have been like really rolling up their sleeves and doing the work. I think after that uh, tweet thread, I kind of wanted to like get some distance from it, and so I haven't been doing much. Like I can't really take credit for much of anything aside from like building that site. But I think a ton of people have been doing like amazing work, and there's already been like pretty significant changes at Telefilm that are heartening to see for sure.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so just to wrap up this conversation, because we're almost getting at the hour point, um, how has the quarantine been for your creativity? Have you been finding yourself screenwriting a lot more, or has it been like a lot harder to get things, done over Zoom maybe for TV?
It hasn't been that difficult, but I'm also not the kind of writer who writes if I'm not like uh, like I don't feel motivated to write all the time, and I don't expect to. And so uh, like typically I'll just make notes in my phone on ideas that pop into my head, and then when I feel like I want to embark on something or I have enough material to create something, I'll like pump it out over a week or something. uh, but then I'll go 3 months or 4 months without writing a word. And so it hasn't been that different. Like I've definitely written a bunch of stuff in the last year, but it's been stuff that like there's other people involved and I have to write it. And it's been fine. Like I don't really have any complaints. I'm used to working from home a lot of the time anyway, and it hasn't been that different.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the things you're working on right now? I know you have a project with Pete Holmes from Crashing, and I know you can't give everything away, but can you kind of talk about something that you're working on, like in a little bit?
Yeah, um, that project I can't say too much about, but it's like it's a fake documentary series about a band. And so it wasn't my initial idea, and Pete had the idea, and I got paired up with Pete to help him develop it and to shoot like a demo pilot. And now we're working on like the next steps of that project, but it's feeling really good, and it's been a good collaboration. And yeah, it's good to work with another comedian yet again. But yeah, there should be more info out about that soon.
Just kind of a quick question. How do you get paired with a writer? Like, how does that kind of process work? If you can tell us about that.
Sure. It's pretty boring. We had the same manager, so my manager is a stand-up comedy manager. So he manages a lot of stand-ups, and I'm one of his only like writer or director clients. And so when Pete was like uh, trying to figure out this idea, uh, my manager Dave like was talking to him about it and thought like it would be a great thing because I work with comedians a lot for us to collaborate on it together. And so we just got like we met up uh, for the first time. We talked about it for a few hours, and then we were shooting a demo like 3 days later. Like it was like extremely fast.
Is that how you met Tim Heidecker as well? Was through your manager, or was that a process that was different?
No, Tim was like a pretty conventional casting uh, situation. Like we had that role in that film, and we were uh, desperately trying to get Tim, and just like begging and pleading, and then we were lucky enough to get him.
Oh wow, that was amazing. Okay, so just kind of a final question. I think that this can sort of, wrap things up. I think there is a lot of people who are, aspiring to be writers and aspiring to be directors who kind of want to make the kind of films that you make, you know, with kind of people talking, and maybe it's not the biggest budget in the world, but you know, but they don't necessarily, you know, like you said, kind of want to, you know, sort of kiss the ring or kind of play dirty politics. What would you say to that group of people? Like, what would the advice be, kind of first and foremost, to somebody who wants to get kind of their low budget film financed? It could be their first film. And what would you say to somebody who doesn't, who's kind of intimidated by the sort of the politics of the film industry?
Well, I think you should avoid the politics for as long as you can. And I think that the smaller that your films are, the less you have to engage in that side of it. And so, like, if you can make a film for like $10,000, I think that's a really good way to start. And especially like if you are in film school, and presumably if you can get access to gear, uh, or also like trade favors with people, like, okay, I'll like be your sound operator on your film if you do it for my film. And like if you do, I think, use your network in that way to pull in as many favors as possible. I think that's a good way to do it for sure. Um, and then yeah, I think the political side of it is inevitable at a certain point. Like if you, I think the more films you make, odds are you're going to want the films to be a bit bigger, because you're going to want to like get paid at least something, but also you're going to want to like have a shot at getting your film distributed or into a good festival, and that's going to necessitate the film being like at least a little bit bigger, and you're not going to be able to just pull favors for that. Um, in that case, I think the piece of advice I would give is to really figure out the business side of it and pay attention to that side of it. Like, like I think it's a good idea to read Variety every day, read the Hollywood Reporter, know who is producing films, know who all the independent producers are in the States, in Canada. There's Playback is like the Canadian version of Variety. I think if you know who those players are, it can really help you uh, in terms of like, the reality is if you want to generate your own material as a writer and director, 90% of your job is going to be the business side of it, because you're going to be shooting for like 10 days a year in a good year. Um, and so I think it's important to know that, and you can do it so easily from home, just paying attention to things. Like I make so many spreadsheets. It's crazy. Like it's good to have spreadsheets, pitch your projects, and shoot your shot for sure.
So in terms of producers, like that you kind of pay attention to who is producing independent films, would you kind of contact them unsolicited, or no? How would that, just kind of in a nutshell, how would, I don't know, how would you use that information?
Well, I'll give you an example. So after Every Day is Like Sunday was made, and it had gotten, we were lucky to get distribution. So it had popped up on Netflix. And at the time, it was like one of the very few Canadian films that were even on Netflix at that point. And I had heard about this producer. I won't say his name, but I heard about this producer who was like interested and intrigued by like the micro budget world. And he hadn't done anything like that. He had only made really big films. And I knew he had like an interest. And I think I had read it in like an article where he had given an interview or something. And so I emailed him and I was like, hey, like I made this film for like a very little amount of money. Like technically it's pretty sloppy. Like we were figuring out a lot of stuff, but like it did get distributed, and here's like a good review we got. And he ended up, like it took a lot of convincing. Like he was willing to take the meeting, and then he came on to Diamond Tongues, and he got his company to invest like $10,000 in making that film. And once I had him on, then we went to all these other independent producers, and we're like, oh, well, we've already got this guy giving us $10,000. Can you put in five? Like it's only $5,000. Like if you do that, like it's just such a small investment, and we can, like I've shown, we can make a feature for that amount of money. And so we did that with like 4 people. And so the film ended up costing like $32,000, but it was just through these producers kind of taking a flyer. But I never would have known like who the producers were if I wasn't like reading those articles. You know what I mean? And I think early on, especially in Canada, I feel like you can email people unsolicited. I think it's less so in LA, but in Canada, there's less of an infrastructure, especially early on, where people are more willing to hear you out when you're starting out.
Okay, I just have one quick question and then I'll let you go. On the right side of my screen, sometimes I see this little leg of a mammal, potentially a cat, potentially a dog, and I want to know what is this animal's name? And yes, everything about this.
You see him there? I can't tell.
Yeah, I can see a paw there. I think that's good.
Yeah, that's Peppy.
Peppy. Hi, Peppy.
Zom.
Oh. Okay, so I think kind of showing pets is like a kind of a good way to, sort of leave off on for today. I wanted to say, Pavan, thank you so much. I know we've been emailing back and forth for like a couple months now, and this has kind of, been a long time coming, and it was such a big pleasure to have you and talk to you about, kind of like your process. And thank you to everybody who's watching right now. Pavan, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It was a lot of fun, and thanks for checking out those films. I appreciate it.
Yes, and to everybody who wants to check out those films, if you're in Canada right now, you can go on CBC Gem and there will be ads, but you can watch all of Pavin's great movies on there. So yes, thank you everyone to watching. Please follow us at UBC Film Society on Instagram and Facebook. The Norm Select series on UBC Film Soc will be hosting a whole ton of really cool events, such as interviews and panels, through the end of the 2021 school year. So please stay tuned. Be safe, everybody. Wear a mask. We're still in a pandemic. And